Hi, everybody. It's Jason, the Change Nerd. Welcome back to the channel. Today's episode is our second in a series about the 5 questions of change. The first one we did was why this and why now. This episode is focusing on what does success look like when we're done. When I've asked people about how their change journeys have gone and asked them if it was uneventful and smooth, generally I get no. Generally they'll say, oh, it changed directions more time than we planned. New stuff came up. We had scope creep. We had to change how things ended up. All sorts of things. Sometimes that can be caused by an unclear definition of what success looks like when you're done. So that's what we're going to talk about in this episode, are some tips and tools to get clear on what success looks like, how we can make sure we know what success looks like, and then who needs to know, who do we need to tell, who do we need to involve. There has to be a clear definition of what success looks like when you get there. Saying things will be better or we need to do this differently, those are unclear and they're really tough to achieve because just be better doesn't really tell people what the definition of success looks like, nor is it a clear metric of what that behavior is going to look like when you're finished. Key piece of success in helping people master the change journey is a clear definition of where you're going. And it has to be something that can be easily defined and something that can be measured too. Like, for example, if you say we're going to paint the powder room red, the definition of success is once the powder room is red and the paint is done and we've cleaned everything up and we're finished, then that's what success looks like. Saying that the powder room is going to look better or nicer, that is true, that is happening. But what does better or nicer look like? That's very subjective. If you say that the powder room is going to be red when we're finished, then you've defined exactly what that change is going to be. It's a lot easier to get people to embrace the change when they know what success looks like. There occasionally is dialogue in talking about what the win-win will look like because sometimes our great ideas aren't shared by everybody. Sometimes we have a great idea and we have to work with other people to get to a win-win where it might be a little bit of this, might be a little bit of that, and then we decide collectively what that success is going to look like. How do you know that you got there? You know, in the corporate world, we have change plans. We put together pieces that have to happen in order for you to get there. It might be some training, some communication, some education sessions, some hands-on things that they're asked you to do something differently. But how are you going to get them there? Because people need to know how they're going to get there. It's pretty easy when we're talking about painting the powder room because that's a pretty easy process. Get some drop cloths, get the paint, mask everything off, paint the room, let it dry, do the cleanup, any touch-up, and then you're finished. But some changes are not that easy. So the complexity of your change is certainly going to be reflected in the plan that you're going to have to put together and how you're going to get them there. A key piece is also who needs to know. So anybody that's affected by that powder room change needs to be aware that there could be a day or two where you can't use it. There may be people coming over to take care of the painting. There might be people coming over to do the masking. But one way or another, they need to know. That has to be mapped out early because so often in life, things move so quickly that we forget to involve people that are affected by the change. And then if you want friction and drama, the one-way ticket is to not include them. And then what is the plan to make it stick? Not so relevant when you're talking about painting the powder room, but when you're asking people to do things differently, what is the plan to make sure that they continue to repeat that behavior over and over again? What is the plan to make sure that they remain supported at the end of the change journey and the behavior becomes permanent? These are all key things. That key piece that we talked about, people needing to know, is very, very important when it comes to documenting your change impacts and having a plan. It requires us to sit down and think about who is affected. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not so obvious. Sometimes it requires us to say, if I do this over here, what other areas does that affect and what other areas might that impact? We also have to document how it used to be and how it's going to be so that people know how to navigate that journey from yesterday to tomorrow. That clear definition of success is also going to help you a lot because when you're defining what yesterday used to look like and what tomorrow is going to look like, that's why you need to be clear. Also, it's important to let people know what they need for success. It may be training. It may be information about someplace else to go while the powder room is out of commission. It may be tips and tools and training that you're going to give them so that they understand. It may be hands-on opportunities to experiment with the new tool, or maybe hands-on experiment to know what the new software does. There has to be a plan, and they need to know what that success definition looks like. One thing to think about is the 2012 movie, The Avengers. Now, the Avengers we've talked about before, and they are folks with different and unique skills. With different and unique skills also comes a different definition of what success looks like. There isn't a shared definition because each one has a different driver and a different motivation. So, for example, Iron Man is always about stopping the bad guy, and Tony Stark wants to be the smartest person in the room. Captain America is very driven by following the mission, doing things the right way, protecting civilians, maintaining order. Thor is always wanting to make sure that Loki is brought to justice, returns home, and doesn't create any more havoc for Asgard. Black Widow and Hawkeye, very similar to Captain America, they are focused on the mission, completing the assignment, keeping everyone alive. Hulk is don't destroy everything. And even though they're technically on the same team, frequently they're not aligned because, again, the motivators are different. The definitions of success are different. Lots of times, leaders and organizations run into that same challenge. They have a different definition of success than the team or the leaders or the business. And getting people united and getting people to work together can be tough. Turning point for the Avengers was when the helicarrier was attacked. So the team finally rallies around a shared outcome, and they decided, okay, first we got to protect the civilians, then we got to stop Loki, and then we got to close this portal. So once that definition of success became clear, they all started to work together, and there was monumental collaboration. Another example of making sure that there is a clear and shared criteria of success is in the movie The Martian. So in the beginning of the movie, there is a storm on Mars and the folks evacuate. And in the confusion and chaos, they end up leaving Mark Watney behind. There's many things that they could have done. They could have decided to abandon him there. They could have decided to send supplies and hope that they make them there in time. They could send the folks back to rescue him. What they decided to do was to do exactly that. They sent the folks back, but it required lots of dialogue and lots of conversation and a rallying around a common. They chose one and only one goal in the end, and that was to bring Mark home alive. Every decision that was made after that point became their anchor. Clear success also drives innovation. Once they became clear about that goal, and once they decided they were going to bring him home, they started thinking about new and different ways that might be outside the box in order to make that happen. Mark had to be innovative about survival, including growing potatoes, modifying the rover, finding some oxygenating hacks, because he knew there was going to be an extended period of time before they returned. The NASA engineers sometimes broke some rules and sometimes had to think differently and challenge assumptions in order to make sure they had a solid plan to get him back. Once the team on Earth and once the team in the spacecraft were aligned, then they made the decisions to make it happen so that they could bring him home. This is exactly what happens in organizations when leaders clearly define what success looks like. People rally around the goal, resources become available, and an innovative method becomes the way of thinking. Creativity increases because people know what they're aiming for. This was best personified when NASA Director Sanders said, "We're going to bring him home." It snapped everybody into alignment and everybody started working on the common goal. So you can see the importance of having a clear definition of what success looks like and a clear plan to help people get there. Change is happening all the time. Sometimes it happens so quickly you may not have the opportunity to put a plan together. When time is available and planning is available, sit down and think about who's affected, who needs to know, and what is the plan for success. It will help you achieve your goals and will help you get your changes done with less friction, less drama. Be sure to like and subscribe for more from the Change Nerd channel and continue watching the series on the 5 questions of change.